All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today. I am Dr. Christine Bedesniova. I am the Vice President of Education at the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida, and I am thrilled to be joined by our guest today, Holly Hunagle. She is the U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism at the AJC. In addition to that, she has a very extensive resume. It was shared out in the materials for this webinar marketing, but I will highlight just a few of them here because they deserve to be mentioned. She has a degree in history from Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California, and a master's from Georgetown University. She has lived and worked in Poland conducting research on ethnic minority relations before World War II. We'll talk a little bit about that later. She has been a scholar in residence at Oxford University with the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism. She has been a researcher at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is how I know her. And she has been a policy advisor to the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism at the U.S. Department of State. And she is in her current illustrious role combating antisemitism at the American Jewish Committee. Holly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Christine. It's a pleasure.
Great. We are really excited to talk to you about not just the work that your organization is doing, but also your personal story to how you came to do this work. Here in Florida, especially Central Florida, we are seeing a rise in some anti-Semitic acts, and also a nice corollary response from our community saying, what can we do? What should we learn? What should we know about? And so we would love for you today to talk a little bit about your personal story, especially how you came to study the Holocaust. So I would love for you to tell us, what was your first memory of learning about the Holocaust?
Thank you, Christine, and for the invitation. And I just want to thank the Holocaust Memorial and Resource and Education Center of Florida, and for everyone listening in. And I'll just quickly take a step back that, if someone had told me 2 decades ago that professionally I would be leading efforts to combat anti-Semitism in the United States, I would not have believed them, in part given my own background. So I'm often asked if I'm Jewish, or people automatically assume I am, since my job is to combat anti-Jewish prejudice. And this assumption that Jews are seen as in charge of or responsible for fighting the hate against them really is the heart of the problem that we need to be discussing. Because I'm not Jewish. I actually grew up in a Christian home in Southern California. But I had the real opportunity to have a family across the street from me growing up who was a Jewish family, and there was a boy my age, and we grew up together, and we were actually best friends. And so that was, in some senses, my introduction to Judaism and the Jewish people, was because of that interaction. But my first memory, just learning about the Holocaust, was in 8th grade. I went to a public school in Southern California, so we did read Elie Wiesel's Night in 8th grade English, and we also had the opportunity to go to the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. But I don't really have a strong connection to that reading necessarily and what I saw at the museum. For me, it was really the experiential learning that happened in college when I studied abroad in Europe. I went with a program of my undergraduate college, which was a Christian liberal arts college in Santa Barbara, California. And they took 40 students to Europe for a full semester. We went to 16 countries, traveling around, but we had a whole course really on 19th and 20th century nationalisms, and the Holocaust and what happened in Nazi Germany was part of that. And we went to Auschwitz-Birkenau for the first time. And afterwards, and some of you who have been to the concentration and death camp might know this, but across the street, there's a building that's can be passed, it can be missed if you're not looking for it, but it's called the Center for Dialogue and Prayer. It's in the town of Auschwitz, where Auschwitz is located. And it was in this center, after our visit, that as a group of Christian college students, we had to grapple. Our professors led this, and I am indebted to them for their leadership in this, but we grappled with what 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism did to set the stage for the Holocaust. And really, as Christians, had to grapple with how our own history is somehow tied in with this genocide. And for me, that was really this entry point into studying it.
Thank you. That's such an interesting story. I love how you mentioned the term dialogue. This is a dialogue for our visitors on this webinar today. I do want to encourage you to put questions that you have in the chat throughout the conversation for Holly. Whatever sparks your interest, we'll be taking them throughout. And we'll be able to talk with Holly today for until about 12:45, 12:50. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking. So Holly, you had this amazing transformative experience in Europe. Is that what drew you to your profession as a historian, as it were?
It started it. And, so that was really why I want to understand Jewish Christian relations and understand, as a Christian, how did this unspeakable thing happen? Something in my mind, that was anathema to Christian belief. And I chose to study Poland in part because it was one country in which so much of the Holocaust occurred, but also because Poland was and is a very Christian country, specifically Catholic country. And there was this intersection between Christianity and nationalism, because Poland was actually a new country at the time, right before the Holocaust. And with modern Polish history, there exists this myth of something called Polish messianism, where Poland as a country, saw itself sort of as a Christ of nations figure, suffering for the sins of Europe, if you will. And this is how that's kind of this myth goes, where some would say that the country was quote unquote crucified in the late 18th century during the partitions to Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Many people don't know that for 123 years there was no Poland. Poland was wiped off the map, if you will, and quote unquote resurrected after World War I. And so some Poles do see this as their narrative, as both a religious and a national narrative. And I wanted to understand how they understood their own suffering in World War II through that lens, especially in the absence of Jews after the Holocaust, and how that would be playing out, specifically in Polish Jewish and Polish Christian relations. And as we'll talk a little bit later in our time together, my journey academically did not stay with Jewish Christian relations. I actually mostly focused on Jewish Muslim relations, which we can discuss later. But just to finish, in hindsight, I do think there was a personal conviction to help make this right, or I can't change the past, but I can work to talk about the Holocaust, teach about the Holocaust, educate about the Holocaust, combat anti-Semitism now. And that was a pivotal point for me. And this was just the last thing I'll note, is I was working full time at the Holocaust Memorial Museum doing academic research on what happened. At the same time, we were starting to see a rise in global anti-Semitism around the world. The very hatred, prejudice, and conspiracy that led to the Holocaust was happening again. And I actually left the Holocaust Memorial Museum to work for the U.S. Department of State at an office that worked on issues of global anti-Semitism in real time. And hopefully, and now my contribution really is to tackling the problem that we're seeing now.
I would love to touch base with you about something that you just said, if we could. I'd love to get your personal thoughts about what it was like for you. One of the things that we have been sharing with people about why we're so excited to have you a guest is you are not Jewish. You yourself mentioned it, and you're combating anti-Semitism. We know that anyone can combat anti-Semitism. It's a community problem. But when you were first learning about it, and you've mentioned several times the role of Christian organizations or churches or even clergy, what was that like for you as a non-Jew, coming to terms with, shall we say, the role of Christianity in this kind of hate?
In hindsight, I think I took it on personally. In the moment, I was, feeling like I was doing the right thing. This is what I want to do professionally. But I think, subconsciously, that's, part of my identity, part of who I am. And again, trying to kind of right that past wrong. And it was very interesting to be employed, because even at the State Department, there were other non-Jews working on this issue. But it was, I really came to grips with my own identity when I working now for a Jewish organization. And to American Jewish Committee's, credit, which AJC is one of the oldest Jewish advocacy organizations in the United States. It was founded in 1906. Mostly Jewish leaders, and it's an incredible, like, a humbling experience, almost this burden of responsibility for them to place like the main task of fighting anti-Semitism in the U.S. on someone who's not Jewish. But at the same time, there's the conversations I've been able to have with people to say, no, this isn't a Jewish problem. this is a societal one. I'm doing this because, Jews shouldn't be having to fight the hatred against them. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, the late Rabbi Sacks, said that the onus, like the victim can't cure the crime, the hated can't cure the hate. It's on all of us. And I like to use that because I think it helps other people find a voice to speak out for others. And that's not just for combating anti-Semitism. We talk about against racism and hatred and Islamophobia and homophobia, et cetera. It's the idea that the group that's being targeted should not be the leaders in speaking out against that hate. And so that's something that I've used.
Right. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit more about this dynamic in society that we're seeing now, because we are being approached by members of the Central Florida community asking us, what can we do to help? But obviously there's a corollary rise in anti-Semitism. There are people who are enacting this behavior. And we know from studying and talking and working with Holocaust survivors that in some of the stories of Holocaust survivors who came to the United States, they reflect and say one of the first times they ever felt safe again after the Holocaust was when they came to the United States and they settled here. And yet now, some of them are alarmed at the rise of anti-Semitism as well. So why are we seeing this rise of anti-Semitism, especially given our history welcoming Holocaust survivors after the Holocaust?
This is the question we're grappling with is, what's happening? Why is it happening? I also don't think we can never forget, what America did. We didn't do it enough. And there's the State Department is very complicit actually in not bringing enough Jewish immigrants into this country. But we should still, look back to the words of those survivors who came here and that did see America as that safe place, as this land of freedom and opportunity. And that's our goal, to return to that, to continue to becoming that more perfect union, if you will. But what we're seeing now is it's not good, Christine. We know that in the last at least 5 to 7 years, we have something we would call like a sustained period of anti-Semitism, or a rise. We do know throughout Jewish history, anti-Semitism has ebbed and flowed, and we're kind of in that rising peak right now. And we publish every year. American Jewish Committee puts out a State of Anti-Semitism in America report that really tries to put a finger on the pulse of how the American Jewish community is feeling. And we survey, it's a representative sample of about 1,500 Jews. We work with a public opinion research firm to get the data really accurate. It's done online and by phone, trying to make sure that this is representative of the community. And we learned a few, alarming things this past year when we did the survey. The report was just released a few months ago in February. But we found that 41% of American Jewish respondents feel that the status of Jews in America is less secure today than a year ago. 41%. In 2021, 31% felt less secure. So just in 1 year, between 2021 and 2022, we have a 10 percentage point increase of American Jews who don't feel as secure in our country. And the top two reasons given was the rise in anti-Semitic attacks and the fact that anti-Semitism is becoming more overt and accepted. Those were the two main reasons. But we also know that American Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism. 1 in 4, 26% have personally been targeted just in the last year. We know that 1 in 5 American Jews who attend synagogue or go to Jewish institutions have felt unsafe in the last year. 1 in 5. So that's a not a good number. And then they're also changing behaviors, and that's something that we're especially attuned to amongst younger people. So we can actually look at how 18 to 29-year-old American Jews respond to these questions and see some differences. And that's something for us to take note of, those who are fighting the problem, like what's it going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, et cetera. And we're seeing some of the behavioral shifts where 4 in 10 American Jews have actually changed their behavior in the last year out of fear of anti-Semitism. Maybe they didn't wear something that would identify them as Jewish. Maybe they didn't go to a synagogue or a Jewish institution, or they didn't post something online. And those numbers, especially on the online space, is much higher for those young Jews. So that's what's happening. And then you asked a great question, is why, and no reason justifies this rise that we're seeing. But as historians and as practitioners in this space, we do have to look at what we might call root causes, or things that are happening simultaneously to contribute to this. But some reasons that justify or some reasons that are leading to this rise is we have, rising economic uncertainty in our country right now. We have a fading confidence in government and in our democracy, and so we see some of these anti-Semitic accusations being lobbied against Jewish leaders. There's an increased emphasis on race and national identity in our country. There's been at least a 55% increase in white supremacist groups in the last 5 to 6 years. We know, unfortunately, that Florida has become a central hub of white supremacist groups. And then also on the flip side, on the far left, we've had some issues where Jews themselves have been accused of being white or white supremacists too, and especially with regards to conversations around Israel. So we see that, but that's still part of that whole increased emphasis in our country on race and national and identity. And so those another one is that the fading legacy of the Holocaust. Again, like we know, we do studies, we do know that not as many people know about the Holocaust, understand its relevance. They don't know where unchecked anti-Semitism can lead. So these are just some of these root causes. And then finally, there's more sources of anti-Semitism today. There's ignorance of what it looks like. Americans really don't know. We know that 31% of Americans aren't even familiar with the term anti-Semitism. So just think almost one in 3 Americans really aren't familiar with it. And then it's even kind of become cool, quote unquote, cool in some spaces. So it's become, cool to draw a Nazi swastika in the bathroom or dress up as Hitler for Halloween. So that's kind of part of this normalization piece. And then it all comes together as I think we talk about ad nauseum, and we're still looking for solutions, is with the digitization of the problem. So there is a reason that we have this current rise right now at the same time in our history. With the rise of with social media platforms being used. And so when we think about anti-Semitism being spread online on social media, now even within machine learning and AI spaces, virtual reality, when we think about the future of anti-Semitism, what it's going to look like in VR, that's also part of this problem for the why, even though it doesn't justify it.
So Holly, let's put a finer point on this, right? The rise is very clear. The immediacy of it, because of technology, is becoming clear, I think, especially to a lot of parents.
Yeah.
But let's discuss for a second, why does this matter to everyone? So you gave us the statistic, that there's a 10% increase in the fact that Jews feel less secure. Why is it that this statistic or this understanding that Jews and the rise of anti-Semitism and the lack of security, why does that matter for everyone and not just Jews in our community or Jews who are experiencing this in certain spaces?
That's something that we need to get across the most, because if someone thinks, well, this doesn't affect me, this isn't not my problem, this is a Jewish problem. So first thing, a very positive statistic to share with everybody is that we asked Americans, we asked the general public, do you think anti-Semitism is a problem only for Jews? Or do you think anti-Semitism is a problem for everyone, that it affects society as a whole? And this was the biggest number that we received by Americans agreeing on something. But 91% of the U.S. general public, 91% said that anti-Semitism is a problem for all of us. It's a problem for society. So at least that recognition was there, and that has a lot to do with what anti-Semitism actually is. Right. So if you kind of break it down and there's other terms that can be used to describe it, whether it's, Jew hatred or anti-Jewish prejudice or Judeophobia, I personally prefer the term anti-Semitism because it does cover that umbrella of hatred, prejudice, conspiracy theory, which is really the primary form today. But at the core of anti-Semitism, it's envy, it's resentment, it's distrust. And so when we have rising anti-Semitism, it's showing that we're not trusting the fabric of our society, our democracy is at stake, our liberal values are at stake, attacking a minority, that's weakening our pluralistic society. And we've actually seen, Christine, this is what's so interesting, because within the Jewish community, we talk about how anti-Semitism is, the canary in the coal mine, and what starts with Jews doesn't end with Jews. But we've seen that in Western Europe, where Jews were first targeted at the Hypercacher supermarket in Paris, or at the Brussels Jewish Museum, and then shortly after there was the attacks in Paris at the Bataclan, which targeted all of French society, like, like democratic liberal, small L, liberal society. And then there was the attack at the Brussels airport, like a year and a half later. But it started with attacks on the Jewish community. And even here in our country, like the same white supremacist hate, even the same manifesto that would lead to, what happened in Poway, California. That was the same manifesto being used to target immigrants and Mexican Americans in El Paso. The same language that was being used against in Buffalo against the predominantly Black American shoppers about a year ago. So you can see these intersections, and that it shows that this is not a Jewish problem. This is an American problem.
It's also a global problem, right?
And a global problem.
Europe for some of those examples. We have
Yes.
a question from the chat from Mitch Bloomer, who wants to know a little bit more about your Polish expertise. And he asked, do you think anti-Semitism plays a role in the popularity of the Law and Justice Party in Poland or in other European rightist political parties? And how does this compare to developments in the US? So maybe share with us a little bit about what's going on in the Polish case, what that means for their democracy there and why that's significant overall.
Yes, there's been this real transition in Poland just in the last about almost 10 years now, and up to a point, we were seeing a lot of progress, I would argue, with Polish society coming to grips with its role with collaboration during the Holocaust, with solid, accurate Holocaust education, with fighting anti-Semitism. And we did see this pendulum swing to the right with the Law and Justice Party, which remain in power. And I think what's really interesting is it's this idea of like anti-Semitism making, kind of like strange bedfellows or bringing different people in, this kind of cross-pollination of ideas. And so anti-Semitism might not be at all the core or the main thing to criticize about this party, but there are members of the party that might have anti-Semitic, attitudes, etc. It's more on like traditional, like Catholic conservative values. It's more, anti-LGBTQ plus communities. It's some of the reasons actually why you might have, we could talk about this as well, but why in the United States, we might have people who aren't necessarily white supremacists still be part of the movement because they identify with these other factors, these other pieces. And that's something that we've seen in Poland, and we've seen a real backsliding now on Holocaust education, on these laws that have been put in place to say that if you criticize or defame the Polish nation or say something against Poland, like what happened during the war, you could face jail time. So we've really seen this democratic backsliding. And that gets to the point before about how anti-Semitism isn't just about Jews. It can lead to, democratic backsliding in these other issues as well. Now, I will say one thing, and this is very interesting to point out, is that the Jewish community in Poland overall, it's quite small, maybe 30,000 people. Many Poles probably still don't know that they have Jewish roots. They was, just with everything that happened, there probably is more Jews in Poland today. They just don't know that they're Jewish, given the Holocaust and then 6 years of communism. But they're mostly safe. So that's what I do want to say. Like it's more attitudinal anti-Semitism. You're not going to be necessarily attacked on the Polish street for wearing a kippah. The security getting into the synagogues and Jewish institutions, it's there, but it's not nearly what you would face in Paris or other cities in Western Europe. So that also is important to know with what's happening in Poland.
That's an important point. I appreciate that, given the history and what we're seeing over there. Let's talk a little bit about this strange bedfellow situation that you were talking about. We often hear the terms neo-Nazi and white supremacists in the United States to describe who's perpetuating anti-Semitism today. But are these terms accurate? For instance, the shooter in Texas who tragically just killed 8 people was Hispanic, but the police found evidence that he had these neo-Nazi ideations. So how is that kind of thing possible if it's linked to white supremacy?
Right. So this is going to unpack a few things because the experts are all kind of grappling with this now. I think, neo-Nazi or Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, she's our current special envoy to combat anti-Semitism in the United States, but, she's a historian of the Holocaust. She's made a joke before that, you can leave the neo in or keep it out. They're still, Nazis at the core. And that term's still applicable in some ways because Nazi belief or ideology anti-Semitism was a foundational component, but there were a lot of other components too, that individuals who espouse these ideas would want to be part of that group or that movement. And unfortunately, it's become this trying to sense of belonging, trying to fit in. If you don't necessarily feel like you fit in with these other groups, but you feel like this is someone that, this is a group that might adhere to certain values that you might have. And again, like this is when it comes to this case of the person, the shooter in Texas, who is of Hispanic descent. Again, there might be something with, more conservatism, like whether religiously or politically, traditional values, again, that those kinds of pieces in addition maybe to anti-Semitism. But a few things. In the case of the shooter in Texas, like we need to remember that racial identity is still is really a social construct. And so we can forget, because we saw this on Twitter right away. They're like, wait, this can't be a white supremacist. He's not quote unquote white. And we actually do ourselves a disservice by being in a binary like this, because this is where it gets complicated, but it doesn't have to be, because we don't remember often that, Latinos they're a pan-ethnic group. Many identify actually as white. There's a whole complicated history of wanting to fit into the quote unquote Anglo community, not just in the United States, but actually in Latin America, because Latin America also has a history of colonization, et cetera. But the point is that because some identify as white, they can hold quote unquote white supremacist views. What's also interesting though is that that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be accepted as white within the very groups they're trying to be a part of. So that's something to think about as well. So couple quick things. Overall, the experts are in agreement to categorize far-right extremism within the Latino community into three main sources. So that first is that the identity as someone who is white and really does believe that they are white and that the white race is superior. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the amount of information that's misinformation, I would say, that's been spread online, trying to recruit members from the Latino community. And then the last piece, and this is hard to talk about, but it needs to be talked about, is that there is a lingering anti-Black views amongst U.S. Latinos, and there's also anti-Semitic views amongst U.S. Latinos. And AJC, and we can follow this up after this session, but we just released a survey of Gen Z and millennial Latino views on anti-Semitism and on Jews. And so we can kind of see some of that correlation as well. And just two anecdotes, because people, again, don't necessarily know this, but the leader of the Groyper Army, which is like kind of a far right white supremacist group, is half Mexican, or his father is half Mexican American. His name's Nick Fuentes. And then Enrique Tarrio, who is the former leader of the Proud Boys, which was, in part behind the insurrection on our nation's capital. And he's been actually convicted for his participation, but he's a Cuban American. So you see these examples that kind of poke holes that this is only a quote unquote white Anglo-Saxon in quotes movement.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to let everybody know we'll be sharing some of the resources that Holly is mentioning, and we'll send them out in the email after the webinar as well. So the AJC has done a lot of reports, but you also have resources. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing, and then some of the resources that you have created in order to help people sort of understand what anti-Semitism is. So I know you mentioned a study that you have done recently that shows that people who know more about the Holocaust also know more about anti-Semitism. Can you tell us a little bit about what is this relationship between knowing about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. And we'll share this study as well as the State of Anti-Semitism in America report. When we talk about like what can people do, we always say there's three main things. The first is understanding the problem. And like that comes with like just the data that's out there. The second is responding and how to report anti-Semitism, what to do when you see it, like all that aspects of combating anti-Semitism. And then the third piece is preventing anti-Semitism. What can we do as a community and individuals to prevent anti-Semitism? And we talk about all of those things in something else called our call to action to combat anti-Semitism in America. And I want to make sure everyone has that resource as well, Christine, because that people always say, what can I do? I'm in the media, or I work for a company. What can I actually do as someone here? And that resource provides guidelines for the individual, which I do want to make sure we share that as well. So with regards to the Holocaust knowledge and anti-Semitism, and this actually came from wanting to understand, is there a correlation when we talk about Holocaust education as being a way to counter anti-Semitism? Is it, and we know that not all Holocaust education is necessarily good education, and maybe it does more damage in some areas if it doesn't really unpack and help students understand the problem, and that what caused the Holocaust is still a contemporary challenge today. But we asked a battery of questions about the Holocaust this past year. So we asked 4 questions to U.S. adults. We had over 1,000 U.S. adults that we interviewed. Again, this was in partnership with SSRS, this public opinion research firm, which leads our surveys. And fortunately, we found that most U.S. adults knew that Auschwitz was a concentration and death camp for Jews. We did give them multiple choice answers, so they didn't have to choose, but we said 85% got that one right. 76% knew the rough timeline that the Holocaust took place, between 1930 and 1950, but we gave them other decades as well, but 76% got that one right. Only 53% knew that 6 million Jews were killed. So only about half of Americans know that 6 million Jews were killed. And then even less, about 39% knew how Hitler came to power. And so the question kind of got a little harder. But this was the most interesting thing, and maybe we might think this is true, but now we have the data to prove it, is that those who got 3 or 4 questions correctly, so they got the majority of the questions correctly, they were more likely to know what anti-Semitism is. We asked a question about defining anti-Semitism, what it is. 85% knew what anti-Semitism is, compared to only 48% who did not get those questions about the Holocaust correctly. They were also more likely to say that it has increased in the past 5 years. So 53% said it had increased in the past 5 years. Only 39% who did not have that Holocaust knowledge said it had increased. And they were also more likely to say that it was a very serious problem in the United States. About 20 percentage point difference in those who said that, who had studied the Holocaust or who knew about the Holocaust, were more likely to see that as well. So those were interesting things to know, that Holocaust knowledge does lend itself to being more aware of attacks and persecution and discrimination against the Jewish community today.
Thank you for that. Education, of course, definitely key. We also have a question in the chat that I think speaks to something else people would like to know about in addition to education. So Sarah G has asked, or suggested, she said, it sounds like the main root cause of radicalization toward white supremacy is loneliness and isolation. And she goes on to ask whether or not the pandemic had a significant impact on those feelings of isolation. But what I particularly appreciate about this question too, Sarah, so thank you for taking the time to write it, is do you have recommendations of local organizations that focus on connecting individuals to communities in healthy ways to help prevent this? So really speaking to what is it that we could do to help foster community and foster understanding in addition to combat anti-Semitism in our local communities?
No, I love this question. I actually think sometimes, in our search for inclusion and belonging, and I say this especially even in progressive spaces, we've inadvertently alienated others. And that is our fault, as it's just, and not that like what's happening with white supremacy in groups is necessarily, these are competing things against each other. But we do know there was an article that came out a couple of years ago about how the United States has a serious problem when it comes to, white men and boys, like not feeling like they have a place in our society anymore. And where are they going to go look for that belonging? It's not going to be in the spaces necessarily that we'd want them to be part of, and the communities that we want them to be part of. And so to your point, like, so where I sit in Washington, I'm calling in from Washington, DC. I work on a lot with like our government, with government policy, with corporate policy, with social media policy, but I'm only going to make a certain amount of dent on some of these issues at that high level. The real, what we're finding now, what actually studies are showing since the pandemic, so this question is perfect, Sarah, is that real change is not happening at these high levels. Not that we shouldn't stop what we're doing. We still need to have laws in place and better policies in place, but real change today is actually happening on the ground level. It's done by people who, you get to meet new people. We know that people change their hearts and minds when they're actually put in new group situations with experiential learning in new environments, and or when they hear something from people that they know and trust. So if there are like, maybe white Christian pastors or leaders or something, they're the ones that are combating anti-Semitism, or they're the ones that are bringing these people into conversation with others, they're actually more likely to be effective and listened to than maybe a Jewish organization just going in and saying, come in here. So I would actually, I don't know the communities at the local level in Central Florida or in the greater Orlando area, but that's actually maybe through the museum. I know American Jewish Committee, we have 3 offices in Florida, but they're more in Southern Florida, but it's actually working through those local institutions to find the right coalitions. Something that we have Muslim Jewish advisory councils, we have Latino Jewish councils, we have Black Jewish groups that do meet locally and ways to connect, but I can't speak for any specific institution in any of the communities, but highly encourage the civic activism from the ground up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Sarah, one of the goals of the Holocaust Memorial Resource Education Center, of course, is to foster these collaborative partnerships. So your question is timely. We have a year-long ongoing conversation about how our community can combat anti-Semitism. So we will be updating our website periodically with trusted resources, trusted partners. And if all of you have ideas for community organizations we need to be talking to or with, that we can bring into the conversation, please don't hesitate to contact someone here at the center. Holly, let's talk a little bit more about this ground level participation in combating anti-Semitism. One of the things that our center, of course, focuses on is Holocaust education. And people may not know that you are actually working on a very unique educational project yourself. You are helping to develop a documentary about Muslim rescuers of Jews during the Holocaust. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this project and its goals. And I know that we actually have a clip that we can share with people today.
Absolutely, Christine. And this is not connected to my work at American Jewish Committee. This comes from research that I did at Georgetown University when I lived in Poland, was traveling in Belarus, where some of these communities still exist today. But the purpose of this film and just this education in general is we are working to find new and creative ways to reach people on the ground in the communities they are. And for me, and this is something that I do see actually in my capacity at American Jewish Committee, is how do we reach the next generation of people who maybe not have any connection to the Holocaust? And one of those communities that was important to me and to my research is, today's like the next generation of young Muslims, not just in the United States, but around the world, who might not understand the Holocaust, one, because it didn't necessarily affect them, or they weren't necessarily part of it, but maybe they see it through an anti-Israel propaganda lens. Maybe they've come from countries where the Holocaust was banned, was allowed to be taught, or there was Holocaust denial and distortion. And so how do we, what creative mediums do we have at our disposal to reach? And my research focused, and I kind of fell into it by listening to some Shoah Foundation testimonies at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, where several Jewish Holocaust survivors started mentioning their Muslim neighbors, the Muslim Tatars who had been in Eastern Poland, but now is Belarus and Lithuania and Poland and parts of Ukraine, and the relationships they had with them. And then how some Jews survived the Holocaust by pretending to be their Muslim neighbors, or how their Tatar Muslims actually helped them escape or hid them. And this was, I didn't even really know that there were ethnic Muslims in Poland when I started this research, let alone that they witnessed and experienced the Holocaust. And that we know stories out of North Africa. We know stories even in Berlin and Paris, and especially in the Balkans and in Albania, of Muslims who had rescued Jews. But in Poland, like the heart of really where the Holocaust took place, these stories weren't told. And it really does bring in, the history of the Holocaust with like the history of Islam and Muslim righteous, actually. And so that it's a film that's just started. It's we have one trailer ready, but this is a future story to be creative with this next generation.
That's great. And what people don't know is I asked Holly to speak about this. This is not a self-promotion on her part. I think there's nothing better than this metaphor of a Christian who's helping to shepherd Muslim stories of Jewish rescue during the Holocaust. And so I asked her if she would mind if we showed the first 4 minutes of the trailer. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Arlene, I know you have that queued up. Arlene will show this, and then we'll share the link with everyone.
My dearest family, who I have not met. To date, you are the only relatives who are left to me in the entire world.
Uncle Abraham Isaac Minkin was shot together with my family on Tisha B'Av 1941. I dug their grave.
They put them into gas chambers. They gas them, he says, the same as you gas little animals. And they shot them, and they were still alive, and they burned them alive. And I, of course, knew that my mother and my little sister were were the first ones.
We do know that there were Tatars who helped rescue Jews, especially Jewish children.
The Tatar population were a Muslim population. They had a mosque. We depended one on the other.
The Tatars are a group of people, Muslims, coming from Eastern European countries like Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, who are descendants from Genghis Khan's like Golden Horde.
I was born on the 8th of January, 1923, in a little town called Ivie.
My dad's parents, both his mom and his dad, were from Evia.
Well, it's my heritage. It's my family, my upbringing.
My biggest regret in life is that I never got to meet Fanny. I think about what she went through, and if she's able to overcome that, I can get through anything in my life.
It's very comforting to be here. It's knowing that I'm the third generation to be, praying here, to be coming here. My kids are going to be the fourth generation, and it's a very physical link, a tie to our history.
What interreligious leaders are saying today in the 21st century is that Muslim-Jewish relations are the topic of our time. There's stories from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Albania, for instance, which rescued all of its Jewish community. It's incredible what some of these faith communities did, and it would be a shame for that story not to be told.
It's very complicated, and it's very hard to have a Jew and Muslim understand those perceptions without the emotion and the historical baggage that comes with.
How her family was killed. I mean, you only know that if someone survived it.
She knew that at some points death would be an easier option, but she chose to survive and live through that. That's always inspirational for me.
We are all people born in the image of God. And there are no better ones and worse ones. We are different, but we are all equal. And people should always remember it and be nice to each other, helpful to each other, and generous.
Thank you, Arlene. We're already getting requests, Holly, for how do we get more information about this documentary. So I just want to rest assured, people to rest assured, we will share this trailer. There's actually more to it. We'll share, it's an extended trailer, and we'll make sure everybody has access to that. But Holly, we have a question in light of the fact that our center is about education and you're creating this beautiful educational resources. So one of our audience members is asking, can you discuss recent criticisms of Holocaust education that focusing on just atrocities of World War II hasn't stopped growing anti-Semitism today, and ways that we might need to expand our educational outreach about Jewish life as well to combat it?
I'll start, Christine, but I feel like you should also jump in here, since this is your bailiwick. But the question is spot on. We Holocaust education is mandated in over 20 states. There's at least 39, almost 40 states that have at least some kind of commission or recommendation or resources to teach about the Holocaust. Most students in America learn about it at some point, whether they read about Diary of Anne Frank or Night by Elie Wiesel, et cetera. They might go to these museums, make these when they go to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade, or they might go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. But studies are showing one thing, that Holocaust knowledge is not good amongst Gen Z and millennials. We do see the gap in that knowledge. In fact, there's some issues with this report a little bit, but the Claims Conference came out with a report in 2020 that actually showed that 11% of younger Americans ages 18 to 29 believe that Jews caused the Holocaust, which was an incredibly concerning finding. And then anecdotally, we also know, and this is kind of what I had mentioned earlier, Christine, with this weird normalization slash cool fact, quote unquote cool factor, is that we have seen when the Diary of Anne Frank is read, or we have seen when the Holocaust is taught, you see this weird, like, kind of trying to push back against authority with that Nazi swastika in the bathroom, or trying to get a rise in some ways. And we're trying to figure out, well, is that problem might be connected to how are we teaching it? How are we teaching it? Showing how, this is something that's serious that needs to, be taken into account today. Two things, then I do want to turn to you to see if you have any, any feedback, is so much of Holocaust history is taught, or so much of the Holocaust is just taught in maybe in a history book or setting, maybe 1933, maybe not, maybe it's 1939 to 1945, and anti-Semitism. Oh, and Jews, by the way, are just part of that piece. And there's really no connection of where that fits in with Jewish history. There's no understanding of who Jews are. People don't necessarily know that anti-Semitism, predated the Holocaust by thousands of years, the root causes for that. Oh, and that it still continued. And so we do, as practitioners, we come across this all the time, where there is this lack of recognition that the anti-Semitism, the very anti-Semitism that led to the genocide of Jews, is still in our society, and it's growing. So something does need to change to make those connections more applicable to what people are seeing, or what people need to learn about today. Otherwise, it will just be part of kind of the history courses, and then therefore, quote unquote, not relevant by this younger generation. But please add something.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think just underscoring, right? Anti-Semitism did not go away after the Holocaust. Perhaps we didn't see it, didn't want to see it, or didn't know how to identify it. And I know here at our center, one of the ways that we are trying to combat anti-Semitism, we're developing, as you know, a brand new museum that's slated to open in several years in downtown Orlando. And our focus is really on first-person narratives, survivor testimonies, all those ways that people can own and tell their own stories. Many of them we have lost. Many of them did not live to tell their own story. But certainly this idea that Jewish stories and Jewish experiences should be told in a holistic and a broader context, so people can make connections to the people, right? And so that's one of our goals here as well at the center. And so we really do believe that learning about Jewish life, in addition to the Holocaust, allows the Holocaust to become part of the Jewish story, rather than Jews becoming a footnote in the Holocaust. And it is just about flipping that upside down. So I want to say we're nearing the end of our time here. Stephanie, I see that you have provided us a question asking Holly to comment on some of our local legislation here. Rather than put Holly on the spot, who may not be well versed in Florida politics at the moment, they're coming so fast. I do want to flip it a little, if it's okay with you, Stephanie, to ask as your final comment, Holly, we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism. We have seen some legislation that I know does concern some people, especially here in Florida, about the role of teachers in education in history. Can you tell us, as you leave, one thing that makes you hopeful in looking forward in the fight to combat anti-Semitism?
one are some of these educational initiatives. The fact that there is going to be a Holocaust Center in Orlando, like that is incredibly hopeful. And in fact, I actually think that is going to be a way to educate a next generation of voters. That's how, if there's laws that are concerning to those of us and the people living in Florida, one way to shift that or to work toward a better society. And again, like what happens in Florida is not going to stay in Florida. It's going to go out to other states as well. And this is, going to be something that we all need to be paying attention to, but it's going to start with that education for this next generation. And so that actually makes me hopeful is one thing. The second thing that's made me hopeful is that we've actually seen some success, and we're not going to see it. We have to keep fighting. We're never going to eliminate anti-Semitism, but we can lower the levels. It was lowered after World War II. We can lower it again now. But we've seen with better data in the last few years, we've actually been able to make some, advocacy, impressive work in that space. We've raised more funds for Jewish communities to be protected. But I think just one small example is in the coming days, the White House is actually going to be releasing a national strategy against anti-Semitism. This is something that other countries around the world have done. The United States has never done this. The United States has never had a national strategy or plan that's coordinating government efforts across the agencies and then empowering the states to do the same. And in the coming days, we're going to be able to see this plan. And that came from direct advocacy, directly using our voices to speak out and saying, we need something, we need to see this change. We need, better government, better law enforcement to protect the communities, et cetera. And so that's just a small example of being active and then seeing the results of that. And so that's what gives me hope, in addition to the various relationships that are being formed to do the good work.
Well, thank you. We're so thrilled, speaking of relationships and partnerships, that you were here today, Holly, to share your personal story with us. It was very inspiring and very informative. We will share the resources. I know you mentioned several. We want to remind people as well, thank you first for your questions, those of you that submitted them. I know we didn't get to them all, as is always the case, but this is an ongoing conversation that our center is committed to continuing with community partners around Central Florida and elsewhere. I want to invite everybody in June. We're continuing this summer a focus on anti-Semitism and sports, and especially focusing on families, because we know, a lot of us have kiddos and our kids are in sports. What's the role of making and building more inclusive societies through things like community organizations, sports clubs, etc.? We have an exhibit about FC Bayern Munich, which was a sports club in Munich, Germany, that had a lot of Jewish players prior to the Holocaust, and most of them were either deported or murdered during the Holocaust. So please join us in June. On June 22nd at the center, we have a reception opening for the FC Bayern Munich Venerated, Persecuted, Forgotten. Otherwise, we want to close by saying once again, thank you, Holly, for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.